Hey guys, welcome back to the Summer of Knives 2017. This is where I'm going to go over the choppers, okay? Ideally a chopper is a large knife, probably a little bit heavier than a machete, and it's used for wood processing and also vegetation. It was primarily created for some type of farm use, some type of agriculture, and it has a lot of influences from Southeast Asia and South America. The blades that you see here were all purchased by myself. So if you see something that's not here, understand that I have amassed a large quantity of knives throughout the 40 plus years that I've been on this planet. And it started as a collection, and of course, if you guys follow my channel, you know that I am a knife maker. I like to purchase items first, test them out, see how they feel, and of course, if it suits me, I'll make something close to it or my style of knife. So if you have a chance, please go up to threeriverblades.com, and I highly recommend checking out all the stuff before you go and purchase one of these knives. Maybe I have something up there that suits your fancy, so thank you for that. Alright, so the 3 or 4 classic knives that we're going to go over again is probably like a Malaysian, Filipino, or a blend of South America, and there's a whole bunch of different names that they call these things. I'm going to go with the general ones that I know of, and if I'm wrong, please, you know, I'm not perfect, okay? There's a lot of information that you can get on the internet, and if you are familiar with these knives or have more experience than me, you can put them down in the comments below. I primarily look for a knife that's going to work for me in a wooded environment and would serve me as more of a chopping survival knife, if you will. Okay, like I said, sometimes it's not convenient to carry a saw, an axe, a small knife. You just need one big chopping blade to do them all. And again, I think that the blades on the table will suit you just fine if you wanted to do away with the axe option. Alright, so what I'm going to talk about is classically the American style camp knife. Now this is made by, I want to say, Condor. Yeah, this is Condor. This is Condor's camp axe. Sorry, camp knife. And it's a pretty decent knife, but somewhere along the pioneer age, where people and farmers and everybody were coming from Europe to America, this typically was the all-in-one knife. Okay, it was probably a little bit thinner than this. It was more traditionally called a trades knife, and you would use this to either butcher animals, set up your camp chores, that type of thing. And you would have a really nice big blade or something heavy enough that if you needed to make kindling, you could. Of course, you could also use it to fend off wild game if you needed to, and of course any type of wild Indian, you know, being that it was the pioneer days. But great knife. I think these camp knives are excellent. I have a couple in my website. If you're interested, please go up to the website and check it out. Now the other knives that you're going to see on the table are primarily an Asian influence or Southeast Asia influence. During the Philippine Wars, I know that the Marine Corps adopted a lot of the tools of the trade because, quite frankly, they just worked. This is typically what you would call a bolo knife, all right? This happens to be a bark river knife, and I'm a big fan of this, and I've used this out in the field before, and what you can see here is probably about the right size, okay? This happens to have, let me get my trusty ruler. The blade size on this is about 9 inches, so I'm a big fan of that. And I think a 9 to 12 inch chopping blade with 3/16 inch thick and a very sharp bevel is really the way to go as far as I'm concerned. Now this happened to have a very shiny grip, and this is green canvas micarta, which happens to be my favorite. So I like OD green canvas micarta. I think it's the right grip, the right texture, and it feels really good in the hand, and it doesn't have too much slip. I did put a lanyard loop on it, and this is a great blade if you're looking for a bolo knife. Now this happens to be the middle version, and they also have, I think they call it the Grasso Bolo or something like that. You got to go up to Bark River or Knives Ship Free. This is the middle one. There's a smaller one, and there's actually a larger one. But for camp chores and from where I'm going, this happens to be the right size. Now, typically on a bolo knife, what you're going to have is a thinner profile near the ricasso that has a nice sweeping belly and a point. All right, it's very important that I point out the point because some of the other knives do not have that. So you can actually use it for thrusting, you could use it for chopping, you could use it for cutting, and this is a great knife, and I highly recommend Bark River knives. This one, on the other hand, is made by Pro Tools, and this was a contract with Arizona Bushman, John Campbell. John Campbell and I happen to be friends. We struck up a conversation on YouTube and became friends, and he's actually tested out some of my knife designs. He's not a knife maker, but a knife designer, and this was primarily made for the hot arid desert where most of the wood becomes some type of petrified stone after a while. So you need, this is a 1/4 of an inch thick. It's very heavy, and I will say that the blade edge on this is about 11 inches, so it's a pretty thick, stout blade. And I will say that it either, you can get the version that comes with a sheath and the version that does not. This does not. Typically on the bolo knife also, you're going to have some type of palm swell in the back, or pommel piece right here, so your fingers won't slip off because you're swinging this very heavy blade. Again, as you can see, very thin near the ricasso, it bellies out, and of course it has a point on it. I did reprofile this knife because I don't think it had enough of the blade edge. It came with a Scandi grind, and there was a lot of problems with this knife with Pro Tool and John Campbell, and I'll let him tell you the story, but I'm glad I got one. I was very happy for the purchase, and of course to support a friend. If you are interested in a cheaper version of the bolo knife, this happens to be the Cutlass Machete by K-Bar. Okay, you can see it's K-Bar, and they call it a Cutlass, but really it's a bolo knife. Okay, so if we had to stop with all the naming convention, you can tell that this is clearly something very similar. Okay, so we'll just call it a bolo. Now it's called a Cutlass for whatever reason, but what I like about this is it's very lightweight. It's a little bit thinner. I'd say about 5/32. It's not the 3/16, which is typical in American made knives, and it might have a stick tang. I don't think it's a full tang, but what I like about this is it has a nice big fat belly right here. The craton handle is very nice, and again, as you see in all these chopping blades, you have something at the pommel to make sure that your hands don't slip off. You could also add a lanyard loop. Alright, so if you're looking for a budget option, this is probably the way to go. Now Bark River knives is probably going to cost you almost 300 bucks. I don't know what Pro Tool is charging for this, but I would say around $200, and I think the bolo knife itself from K-Bar is probably going to run you about 60 bucks. The sheaths in itself are something different. Normally you would get a leather sheath with the Bark River, which is nice. I had to make a Kydex for this, and this has that typical crappy Taiwanese sheath. I'm not even going to go into it. Alright, so that's the bolo knife, and you cannot go wrong with a large chopping blade if you're going to go with the bolo. I know it's a fan favorite of mine, and a lot of people use it. The next we're going to talk about is a parang. And the thing that's different about a parang, and it is also a large chopping knife, this happens to be made by Condor, and I think they use 1075 steel. This has a very big belly, and again has starts small at the handle, has a big belly, but the difference is you're going to see on parangs is the tip. Okay, you can see this has a sheep's foot tip, and this actually has a belly tip. So this is not made for any type of piercing. The parangs themselves are not made for piercing. I think this one is called the Warlock, and I think it's a fancy design made by Condor. Condor always comes with a nice leather sheath, and it's a good blade, but it is heavy. This happened to come with the some type of I think, yeah, this is micarta. So the micarta in it is a little bit different. It's made of it's a little bit more expensive than the traditional one. Now the traditional one looks something like this. This is what's called a village parang. Very simple. Again, you can see the sheep's foot design. It has a very skinny neck or skinny ricasso, and it comes out in all the weight you want to be in the front because it's typical of a chopping action. The traditional version of it is going to come with a wood handle, and it has a little ball at the end. This one does, okay? Really nice parang, and I know that the British military is a big fan of the parang. So the Marine Corps, the American Marine Corps, went big with the bolo machete because of their wars, and I believe that the British went with the parang and adopted their style because of their wars. So it kind of makes sense that when you go to an indigenous tribe where they are using a lot of their own cutting tools, it makes sense to kind of adopt it if it works, okay? This is the cheaper version of the parang from Condor, and as you can see, this one is made by a PVC type handle, and I think this is called the Econo Parang. Condor sheath. This comes with a leather sheath. Okay, so if you're familiar with Condor, you kind of know the difference. This one is the cheap budget option, and this one is more traditional. They both work excellent, but as you can see, this one has more of a sweeping belly, and this one has more of a straight belly. Okay, there's no real belly in here, but ideally, what these are chopping blades. Okay, so if you are someone that, you know, wants to take away or alleviate yourself from an axe, both of these would do excellent. Okay, so the next one I'm going to go over is probably a cult classic. Is the kukri knife. Now the kukri knife, you've probably seen it in about a dozen movies, and if you really wanted to read up on this, Nepalese army or the Gurkhas are awesome with this. They are by far probably the most deadliest people when it comes to using one of these knives, obviously because their army trains with it. It is stated that they can take off a limb of a human being with one of these knives. Now this one's made by cold steel. It's not the traditional one, but I just wanted to give you an idea. This is their everyday fighting knife. This is their camp knife. This is what they do chores with. Okay, so a lot of times you will read in the history books about the Gurkhas where, you know, once they run out of ammo, they didn't use bayonets. This was their knife, and most of the time when they graduate their boot camp, this is what they are issued. Okay, so in America, I guess to compare it to the United States Marine Corps, we use typically bayonets or we use the K-bar. This is their K-bar. Okay, it's a big knife, and if you are somebody that has ever traveled to Southeast Asia, and you know it's a very heavily wooded area, a lot of bamboo, a lot of jungle vines, a lot of that stuff, you need something like this. You need a large chopping knife. This happens to be cold steel. It comes with a Secure X style sheath, and this one came with the guard, so if you want to do stabbing motion and you didn't want to bust up your knuckles, you absolutely have a little bit of protection. It's not traditional to have this guard, but it costs about the same price as the one without it, and for me, I figured why not. A little bit on the cheaper side, this is Ontario's kukri. Alright, a little bit different design. It has more of a bend to it, as you can see. This one has more of a sweeping design. This one has typically a straight bend. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole thing of what's the correct way to make a kukri. I have never attempted to make a kukri. I know that probably I will at some point. But if you are looking for a cheaper option, this is probably the best one that you're going to get. It is made by, like I said, Ontario Knife Company. It comes coated. It is it is a carbon steel. The blade on this, again, I'm pretty sure this is just a stick tang. It's not a full tang. But very comfortable, craton handle. The sheath on it, again, is that cheap flimsy cardboard one, but if you're looking for a budget option, this would be very nice. And ideally, what you have to do is be very careful with these knives if you're using it for chopping. Like I said, the American style of chopping is way different than the Southeast Asia style. Okay, so if you can notice right here, the blade is way lower than my hand. Okay, and what happens is, a lot of times, if you're used to using something like this, which is more of a small crusader sword, you know where the blade's going to end up. On this, the blade is way past where it's going to end up, so you have to be careful. I know a lot of people that injured themselves using kukris because when they swing, and if they swing and they miss, or if they swing, the blade is definitely lower, and you could hit yourself in the knee or in the leg, or take off a limb with these. So be very, very careful with kukris, especially if you're not used to it. This is Tops Kukri, and it's LVI Bushcraft and Survival. This is their version of a bushcraft style kukri. Now I know there's a lot of guys that go out into the field and use kukris, obviously for the same reason that everybody uses these other chopping blades, because they work. They're excellent. Now this one is made a little bit smaller than the other ones because it was somebody that I forget his name and I apologize, but you can look him up. He is the designer of this. He contracted through Tops, and Tops makes it, and I think that these sold very, very well because, quite honestly, a kukri is an awesome woods tool. It works great. Now, a little bit different on the design, obviously, because it's smaller. It has to be a little bit more wieldy. It has to do a lot of things, but what I like about this is you can definitely use it as a draw knife like the other kukris. It has a big sweeping belly, and it's not too large. That in itself is great for weight and I guess compactability, but I will say that if you are looking for a chopping knife, I kind of want to go with a larger size. And the reason for that is if I am going to use a small blade, I will use a small blade, but the compact size of this knife is excellent. I think that if you are looking for a kukri or a bush knife that fits and kind of looks cool and is actually pretty comfortable considering its size, you really can't go wrong with Tops Bushcrafter Kukri 7. This is number 7. Okay, really cool design. I think it's Nick, I want to say Nick Fury. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but really cool design. Has, you know, the bow divot and all that, and I think a lot of people like this knife. So I apologize if you think I'm bashing on it. I'm really not. I think that it's a good design, or else I wouldn't have bought it. Now the next one is considered a golok. What's the difference between a golok and the other designs? Very simple. It has a sweeping belly. See this large sweeping belly? This is a golok machete, as what Condor calls it. Again, very thin at the ricasso, has a long sweeping belly, and as you can see, it's a very long blade. This blade is typically used for vegetation, but you could really go to work and go to town on some wood. Now with this knife, as you can see, I'm going to show you, the bolo has a point. This has a sweeping belly. This has a sheep's foot, or close to a sheep's foot. Okay, this has a sweeping belly. The kukri has a point and a downward angle and a sweeping belly. Okay, so the difference is basically what village or what country created it. These are all excellent knives that I would use as a primary chopper. Now this one right here is also called a golok, and as you can see, there's no point on it. Okay, usually has some type of flared handle or something like that. A little bit smaller, a little bit wider, but this is something that you would see basically in the jungle. It's just a large flat style machete or chopper that would do a lot of wood processing, and you don't have to get caught up in the naming convention, but any of these knives would do excellent in any situation. And if you want to call it a golok, you want to call it something else, you can even call it a parang if you want, although I think typically you would be wrong. But I mean, these are excellent blades, and you really can't go wrong with this. So that's pretty much it as far as my chopping. I know I have a lot more chopping blades, and I'm a big fan of these knives right here. I didn't go over the sheets specifically because I wanted to make this a little bit shorter of a video. The American style knife, you have the bolos, you have the parangs, the kukri, and of course the goloks. So thank you very much, guys. Thanks for staying tuned. Please go to threeriverblades.com. Stay tuned for the next Summer of Knives video. Talk to you soon. Stay safe.